We also would like to continue the discussion on stage, so if you could get your drink and take a seat, then we can continue. So, all right. As promised, after the break, we're now going to talk about, focus more on the solutions, and we'll do that by starting off with a presentation by Maurits Groen. And Maurits, maybe some of you have already heard of him. He's a prominent name in the Dutch sustainability scene. He started out as a journalist, but he's also a long-time experienced consultant when it comes to sustainability issues. He's the founder of multiple organizations and company, including WakaWaka, that produces solar-powered LED lights. So I think he's going to provide us with very interesting insights. And I'd say, Maurits, the floor is yours.
It's working. Talking about solutions. Actually, I think that's hard because I'm not a very happy, clappy person that only talks about solutions, whereas the problems are huge and getting bigger and more severe. The word climate change has been used here for, I think, 50 times this afternoon, this evening. I never use the word climate change because we're talking about climate disruption. Change is very neutral, disruption is not, and words matter. So when I'm talking about solutions, I always do so in the context of a big and a growing and a very urgent problem. And it seems often when we debate about climate disruption that it is our choice to do something or not to do something, like if the laws of nature, which we're dealing with, are laws that we can change or abolish or amend or whatever. And that's not the case. So where we are talking and while we are not acting, nature just responds to our actions. And last year, of course, again, not only we had the weather records every time and again, but we also emitted more greenhouse gases than ever before in the history of mankind. And that's 3 years after the Paris Agreement, which was a wonder in itself. So I've been, like you said, starting to be a journalist in environmental matters in the 70s already. And we wrote about climate disruption by then also. And we knew what was happening because it's about laws of nature. And not much has happened. And still not much is happening. In 2006, I became a publisher by chance, not by choice. Because nobody in the Netherlands wanted to publish the book by Al Gore. Nobody. No one single publisher wanted to do that. So I translated it myself together with a colleague. And the same was true for the film. Nobody wanted to screen the film. And then I organized a premiere in Tuschinski and the Prime Minister came and then it became an issue. But that's 13 years ago. And our emissions are...
The name of the movie?
An Inconvenient Truth, of course, by Al Gore. Everybody knows that, I guess, by now. Okay. So then I started to, like you said, to establish companies that actually continued communicating about the problems, but especially about the solutions, by doing something about the problem. Because people listen more to what you do than to what you say. Like children look more to what their parents do than to what they say they should do. So I started a company on, like you said, on solar power, not only light but also power banks that you can charge your phone with or your radio or whatever. Since a lot of African people still live in energy poverty, and when our choice is, or our insight, that they should not, that they should skip the fossil fuel era and immediately start like they did with mobile phones, instead of laying the landlines like we did 100 years ago, immediately turn to solar And Africa, like you said, is a huge continent, and it has a lot of sun, whereas solar is, in contrary to coal, oil, gas, which will be running out, apart from causing a lot of problems, it's about eternal. It is delivered at your doorstep every day for free, and it's safe at the same time. So why don't we turn to that solution right away? So I produce that WakaWaka, which is a strange name. Of course, it's African. It's Swahili, shine bright. But then again, the food system is an even bigger problem, because you can do without power. It's difficult, but you can. But without food, it's getting really, really difficult. And our food system is disastrous for the planet, disastrous. Our chicken, our cows, our pigs, they eat away the Amazon rainforest in the form of soybeans that we plant after we cut the trees and we set fire to them. So I don't have much time, so I make it very condensed. So I started a company called Kipster, which produces eggs and chicken meat, which is the animal protein with the smallest footprint, without any footprint, because we do not grow any food for the chicken. They only eat so-called waste. That's part of the solution. 100 years ago, there was not one single chicken farmer in the world. There wasn't a pig farmer in the world. Of course, farmers had chicken and they had pigs, but only to the extent that they had waste, or that the chicken could run around, find their own food. We didn't grow any food for those animals. And that's a natural system. So we should go back to that, which means that we should eat much less meat, if at all. It's not healthy if we do so. So by producing alternatives, and I can mention some more, I won't because of the time, by producing alternatives, I try to show that it's possible. One of the later things is, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is a book called Draw Down. Is there anyone in the room who has heard about the book? Yes, several ones. Draw down is a word which describes the moment in time that the concentration of CO2, which is a greenhouse gas, goes down. In the pre-industrial era, the concentration was 270 parts per million in the air. It's now 410, whereas the safe level is 350. We're approaching the 450 mark very rapidly. We will cross that quite soon, actually, I think. And that will mean that we will cross the 2 degrees centigrade level. Even if mankind would be able to fulfill and implement all the agreements, all the promises that they made in Paris, we will still cross the 3 degrees threshold. And one of the books that I published after Al Gore's book was called 6 Degrees by Mark Linus. He was a journalist from England, a scientific journalist, and he had a gigantic task for himself, set for himself, to go through all the literature that was available by then, that was 10 years ago, to see, to evaluate what the consequences would be if the global or the regional general concentration, the general temperature would rise 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 degrees. 3 degrees is almost permanent disaster, you could say. We are going to cross that threshold, even if we implement all the plans that we have promised to do in time, which we all know we won't. The book Drawdown describes the top 100 solutions, top 100, there's many more, top 100, 80 ones that are already on the shelf, are already implemented, are very profitable to implement, that exist today, and 20 actually are what they call coming solutions, coming attractions. already in the pipeline, already proven, but not yet implemented on a scale that you can implement on a large scale. So the top 80 solutions can already, for a very large part, 3/4, solve the problem. So what's the problem? Because that book has a structure which has been able to calculate to a very deep degree of certainty what the investment would be globally, from now up to 2050, and what the return would be in financial terms. On average, it's 250%. So the return is 250% on your investment, financially, let alone that you prevent a lot of cost that you run into when you have the consequence of climate disruption upon you. And that is only damages. That's not investment in the future. The very strange or the surprising thing is that a number of those solutions, a number are very, very ordinary. We know all that. We should not cut down rainforest. Our peatland, we should not drain it from water, etc. We should have silvopasture, we should have agroforestry, we should have all those kind of things. But the number one solution, which surpasses all wind turbines and all solar power combined and all electric cars together, is the prevention of cooling agents in our fridges, in air conditioning agents, and in cool houses, warehouses, to escape into the environment. Because when we had the Montreal Agreement about the CFKs, to prevent the hole in the ozone layer to get bigger, we did that very rapidly. But we replaced those CFKs with HFCs, a chemical agent which is not harming the ozone layer, but it does act as a very potent greenhouse gas. 1,000 to 9,000 times stronger than CO2. And there's a lot of those around. So if we take care of that, and we invest in recycling, etc., and destruction in a good way, in an environmentally safe way, we prevent a lot of problems. The number 3 is the prevention of food waste. 1/3 of all food globally, 1/3, is not being eaten after having been produced, which takes a lot of water, which takes a lot of resources, energy, etc., etc. Capital, 1/3. And in developing countries, that loss takes place in the beginning because there's no good storage facilities, the infrastructure is bad, so you lose a lot. And in developed countries, it is us, the consumers, that just throw away. We do not consume. Or we throw away after half having been consumed, not all of it that we have made for ourselves. 1/3. So if we would do a little bit clever with that, that's a huge contribution to solving that climate problem. Number 6, very surprising, education of girls in developing countries. There's 130 million girls that do not have one single day of education. Not one. If they would, primary, secondary education, it has been calculated in this book, that would prevent the birth, it sounds a bit silly, but to prevent the birth of 483 million births, which means almost 1 billion people that will not consume all the things that we do, which will prevent a lot of conflict for all those scarce resources. Apart from women leading a fuller life, having other possibilities than only having 8 children, of which half dies, and the other 4 are necessary for old age pension income for the people in their old age. Just like us. Very surprising solutions, and sometimes very, very ordinary. All the solutions are here. And when talking about solutions, I'm enthusiastic about it. I'm at the same time very, very angry at the politicians that disregard all the solutions that are there. The short-termism is blatant. All the solutions are there, they're profitable, but they just do not want to propagate, to tell about it and to rally the people behind it. They just do not want to show us what's ahead. And again, talking about solutions, happy clappy, they are all there, they're profitable. If we do not, the consequences will be upon us. So it's two side coins. When you want to solve a problem, you first have to convince people that there is a problem. And if you paint the picture too dark, people will give up. They will run to despair, from denial to despair. So that's not a positive thing. If you only talk about solutions, people think, well, that will be solved. We don't have to do anything with it. So it's a really subtle scale what to do. You have to alarm people, but not to the extent that they panic. You have to motivate them to do something by showing that it can be done, that it can be profitable. And actually, the lead author of this, he's been in the Netherlands, and then that's what I'm ending with. The lead author was here last month at my invitation. And he said, after having talked about all these solutions for more than an hour, he says, even if climate disruption did not exist, even if we would not have any of those problems that he's been talking about, this would be the life that we would like to live. This is like we would like to choose, no matter what the problems. So why don't we do that?
Thank you, Maurits. Yeah.
This is the book, by the way.
It's impressive to see that you're certainly maybe not a happy, clappy person, but someone who understands the enormity of this problem, but still manages to remain hopeful. But maybe one brief question before we go to the reaction is also then the question: if we know what the solutions is, then why? So maybe the question is not what are the solutions, but why don't we implement it? Why is it that politicians are stuck in this short-termism?
There's many answers to that, of course. One, of course, is that politicians want to be chosen again. And it takes a lot of courage, knowledge and courage, and perseverance to put things on the agenda when they're not really nice and funny. And when the gain is not around the corner, when you have to persevere in order to really make an impact. That's one thing, of course. And then again, there's a lot of, I'm not a conspiracy person, but there's a lot of vested interest in the current system. Even today, we invest 400 billion every year in new fossil fuel installations, new ones. The agriculture that we have is massively addicted to fossil fuels. Fertilizers, pesticides, machinery, processing equipment, it is all fossil fuel based. So it takes a lot of
it's also powerful
system
losers.
change. Sorry?
There are powerful losers, potential losers if we make the transition.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it. Yeah.
Okay, so I was wondering maybe Andrew and Marnix, if you could give a reaction to something you mentioned, like the question, should Africa or African countries follow the Western path of development, or can they like skip the fossil fuel stage? You've mentioned that in Zimbabwe there's still a lot of coal-powered infrastructural projects. How do you view this, Marnix?
Well, I know it from a very small scale. This small-time black tobacco farmer can only phone to me because he has a small solar system in his hut to recharge his phone. So it's not only using energy, but it's also your connection to the world, basically, by small solar systems. And they're affordable. I mean, if he has a good crop, then he can buy it. And he did. So it is happening a lot already, I think. But a general thing like getting girls into classes, it's a bit more long-term solution, of course. But if you raise the middle class, if you want to send your children to school, it helps if you don't have too many children. So that's a way to get less population. Yeah, I see that solution.
But in Zimbabwe at the moment, the issue of population is not yet a real issue.
No, it's going down actually.
Yeah, actually it's going, yes. It's not, because if you look at our current population, it's around 14 million. And normally they said we still have, in terms of natural resources or land, we still have a lot of land, and we should not talk about, say, climate change and population growth at the moment. But I know when it comes to getting the resources, even though we've got only 10 million people, are they accessing, do they have food, do they have clean water, do they have access to education or access to health? But at times it's not about having a large number. If we might have only 2 people in Zimbabwe, but if they are not accessing education, health, do we say, okay, we are happy because we are only 2 people, but are we accessing the needs, or do we have the education, or do we have the water, do we have the food? Because we cannot say we are just the 2 of us, but we are hungry, then of course we are okay. So at times the issue of population vis-a-vis the needs, or the like food and whatever, it's a little bit
unfair.
Yeah, it's a yes.
Okay, I have the feeling that you... Did you have something to add?
It's not about using Africa as a scapegoat, for example, because of maybe the population growth over there, but just in general, in the global population, and what maybe are other parts of the solution. And I know it's not, like you were all talking about, it's not the entire solution, of course, because there are so many things, but this is just one of the things we can, in my opinion, can help so much compared as well to the other things.
That's an important but a whole complicated discussion as well. So unless somebody has one pressing comment or answer on that.
One little addition, when we talk about overpopulation, I think it's very important to stress, because people always look to Africa, people 8 children, etc. The footprint per person in Western Europe, or let alone in the United States, is much, much, much bigger than an African. So the overpopulation in terms of resource use in general is here. Let's be clear about that.
Okay, so maybe 1 or 2 last questions, and then I was told that there are also 2 school children here that were part of the climate strikes, and so these are really school children that weren't just went there to have a day off, but they're actually involved in this issue and they're here tonight, and I would like to give them a brief moment also to share their thoughts on this evening and the problem. But before we go to them for the final comments, are there any more questions from the audience?
Yeah. Just one. Since I'm a new politician, so I'm not really... I just want to ask, like, Maurits Groen, don't you expect too much of the politicians? There's not much... well, of course we have the measurements we need to take, but we're just like into a very... part of a very old structure, and we need to navigate into this system. Of course, we try to navigate, but we need more help.
It's surprising that a politician asks for help, because I think the role of politician is to address the issues that society faces, and to be clear and honest about it. And I think at the moment the debate is being diverted from where the real issues are. And I'm not pointing to the politicians in general, because we have very good politicians as well. But I think that's the role of politicians. In the 80s, for example, and Boat knows that very well, who's next to you. In the 80s, it was the government that appealed to industry to take its responsibility. Now it's the other way around. For example, even Shell, to just name a company, for their internal decisions on whether or not to invest in a certain project, they will calculate a CO2 price of 60 euros per ton. 60. It is now 5. So they will not admit to a new proposal for an investment if it cannot withstand a possible future CO2 emission levy of 60 euros. And this is in the whole of the industry. So why don't the politicians take that step? It is being asked by the industry to do that. I mean, we have a CO2 discussion at the moment because there's, of course, several industries, high ovens, for example, that will be hurt about that, by that. So we should make it a very clever exception for keeping the very relatively clean ovens here instead of importing dirty steel from elsewhere, for example. But the rest of the industry, it has to be calculated, can very well even profit from that CO2 levy. Actually, the free riders, the companies that do not invest in innovation, in sustainable energy, in efficiency, etc., they are being punished because the free riders can have a go. So it is very detrimental that we uphold this system, and this is something that government should do. Industries cannot do. They are waiting for they're even stating that publicly. Even Shell does that. So that is where politicians should come in.
Okay, so it's up to you, policymakers. One final question from the audience, and perhaps by.
Yeah, actually, I have one last question for Andrew. You said you write about climate change or climate disruption, as we heard, and at the same time, you said politicians are not really. It's not really an issue on the agenda. So I was wondering how decision makers respond to your work. Actually, do you reach them, or how do you raise awareness in your country for this topic?
Yeah, but actually, you know, politicians at times, when it is good for them, they can start talk about an issue. But when it is not, then they... Because when it comes to... Zimbabwe has got possibly how many climate change policies? About 3. Yeah, the policies are there, but at the end of the day, is there any implementation going on? Because they are silent, especially on the issue of implementation. But they've got very good blueprints on climate and climate change. But the issue is on implementation. They prefer to give the resources to other issues than giving it on. And at times, prevention in Zimbabwe, they don't want to prevent, because otherwise they are interested in photo shoot. You know, when there's a disaster, they go there, they appear as if they are helping, then it becomes good for them. But imagine, they come up with some programs to say, looking at issues to do with hunger, and there's no issue about food donations and whatever. Do you think the politicians will have an opportunity to come and say, we have brought you this? Because normally they will say, we are bringing you this food, it's because of us. And so at times, it's all about implementation. Yes, the policies might be there, but is there the political will to implement those? And of course, we know we should expect a lot from our politicians, but that's why we elect them, because they should lead in some of these projects. And
do you have the feeling that your work as a journalist contributes to that, to put it more on the agenda, or to?
Yeah. At times, you know, of course, one frustrating issue at times is we try to raise some of these issues, and that's why we go to the people, because at times the people cannot talk directly to the politicians. They can talk through us as journalists. At times the politicians, some are level-headed, I should say. Yes, they can listen to some of these problems, but in some cases, it's so frustrating. You do quite good stories, but you know there's little in terms of action, especially on the ground. So, yeah, of course we know they read, but at times they don't act. So what's missing is the action part. Yeah, of course they might read, but they just see, don't act on some of these issues. So at times it's so disappointing.
We end on a gloomy note, but maybe there's still hope, because, like I said, we have two scholieren, klimaatspijbelaars of klimaatstakers, the school children that we were telling you about. They were on strike to put the issue on the political agenda here, and I was wondering if you had some thoughts you wanted to share on this evening, or maybe a question for the audience. If you prefer to do it in Dutch, that's also fine. Yeah?
Well, no, I'm fine. I'm fine here, no.
Maybe give them an applause.
Thank you. No, I think we're really glad to be here, because I hope our generation can be a part of the solution. And as we made clear by demonstrating, I think it's very clear that we grew up with the thought of climate change, or climate disruption, sorry. And we are educated on this, so I think we will, and I hope we will be the generation to solve this problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's because we've been, we grew up with more awareness than the generation before us, and we have more knowledge about the subject because it's become an issue that's become, well, on the agenda. And I think that's very promising, because that way we can, I think there are a lot of, well, people that are invested from our age, that have very promising ideas, and I'm very interested into what our generation is going to give. And I also had a question. Obviously, there's a lack of money in Zimbabwe, but let's say we did have the money. Let's say we did have the awareness in politics, especially. What would we need to prioritize first? Like, should we invest in? Should we invest in irrigation methodology, or in hazard management, or research for solutions, other solutions? What should we prioritize first?
The two people left on stage are perfectly suited to answer that question, and then, so I'd like to ask you to keep it a bit brief, because we already ran out of time.
Okay, mostly because in Zimbabwe, about say 80% of the population, they're involved in agriculture, but normally this agriculture, they depend on the rainfall. So we should find ways of making agriculture sustainable. You know, even if we come up with better crops, irrigations, and most of the investment should be centered on agriculture, because that is the livelihood. Yes, of course, we can also invest in things like solar energy, clean energy, and whatever, but we should look at how to improve the food sustenance, and how best can we make people be able to produce without depending on rainfall.
Something you'd like to add?
Maybe education and awareness. I think that also that helps, that people are aware of it. And I think journalists can help there.
And you can help as well by protesting. 10 March, the climate march in Amsterdam, that also helps by raising awareness. Thank you all very much. Thank you also, Maurits and Marnix. Give them a warm applause, and thank you for being here. This was the first of 5 debates. There'll be a couple coming up. We're going from the global to the national to the local level. So we hope to see you at those debates as well.